Probably all of us have heard the phrase, don't take the name of the Lord your God in vain. But probably very few of us have wondered, how would an ancient Israelite understand that? Because let's just be honest, an ancient Israelite was not thinking about saying Jesus when you stub your toe. So how would they understand it? Well, there's a couple of issues here that we're going to work through. And the first is that the verse actually reads, don't take the name Yahweh, your God, in vain. But the tradition developed where instead of saying Yahweh, which is God's name, we would say the Lord. And this is why most of your English translations, when they have Yahweh in the Hebrew, they'll write Lord all capital letters. A tradition developed where in the intertestamental period, that is, between the Old Testament and the New Testament, the Jews started saying, hey, if I never take the name Yahweh at all, I won't have to worry about taking it in vain. So they would start saying Adonai, which is the Hebrew word for Lord. And this tradition developed, and for some reason, it's reflected in our translations today. But the verse actually reads, don't take the name Yahweh, your God, in vain. Now, there are two main interpretations for how to understand this command. And I would say that both of them are equally valid. I'm just being honest with you. I don't know. I can't decide. They both make sense to me. The first interpretation is, I guess, probably how we would naturally think of it. The word take means to lift up or to carry or to bear something. And the idea is, don't bear the name of Yahweh in vain. Don't do it pointlessly. Don't do it uselessly. This all ties back to the covenant stuff that we were talking about, where the idea is that God was going to draw a people to himself and they were going to represent him. And what God is saying in this command is, you're my representatives. You are my missions plan to the world. So don't carry around my identity. Don't carry around the identity of being my people in vain. And basically what that means for us is that pretty much any time we sin or we misrepresent God in some way, we're actually breaking this command. And so rather than just a simple, don't say Jesus when you stub your toe, what you're being said here is to meditate on and take seriously the idea that in your daily life, you are representing the Lord. And it is our responsibility to think about, how can I best represent the world in the context in which God puts me? And so it's actually a very pervasive command that has really strong implications even for us today. The second main interpretation of this command is a little more difficult for us to wrap our brains around, because it's kind of a foreign idea to us, but it has to do with the word that we translate in vain. The Hebrew word there can also be translated in divination. And so the idea is, don't take the name Yahweh, your God, and use that name in divination rituals. You see, in the ancient Near East, there was this idea, and it was especially prevalent in Egyptian texts, that if we could figure out the real name of a deity, then we could invoke that name, call on that name in our divination rituals, and the deity we were calling on would have to act on our behalf. Divination was essentially the means by which someone in the ancient world determined the will of the gods and basically got the gods to act on their behalf. It was a very manipulative system, and it's that manipulative element that is the core of idolatry that led the Lord in Deuteronomy to outlaw divination on any level. And it's easy for us to look at it and go, well, I don't do divination rituals, so this doesn't really apply to me. But think about this. Have you ever been running late to work? And it seems like when you're running late to work, you manage to hit every single red light along the way. And you start thinking, oh man, God must be against me today. Or Have you ever said, I've been having my quiet time every day this week, and I've been doing a pretty good job, so things are probably going to work out for me. God's on my side, or God's going to work out things for me. Or have you ever thought, oh man, I haven't been following God very well lately, so he's probably going to thump me. Or how about this one? If we could only pray in just the right way, then God would certainly act on our behalf. Well, the reality is, all of those are attempts to manipulate God. It reveals a thinking where we believe deep in our core that if we just do things the right way, then God mechanically has to act or perform in a certain way. And it just doesn't work that way. That is the core of manipulating God. It is what the Old Testament calls idolatry. And so even though we don't do divination rituals, I have to be honest and say that I do have times where I feel like if I can just pray the right way, then God will bless what I'm doing. And the reality is that, yeah, God says I like to respond favorably to people who are following me, and I have a tendency to respond to sin and take action. But that doesn't mean that we can just always assume God is going to behave in a certain way dependent on our action. And so I think the challenge for us is to sit back and assess, are there ways, are there thought patterns I have that are reflecting a belief that I can somehow get God to do or not do certain things in my life? And as we begin to identify those things, we need to realize that that is divination or manipulation of God, and it's a violation of this command.